When Soul Hackers 2 came out in August of 2022, it was met with less than ideal reception. I really wasn't into any of the broader series outside of some of the modern Persona games at the time, so it really wasn't something I was interested in or even cared about. I didn't really know too much else about it, aside from the fact that it didn't really do very good financially or critically. Since then, however, I've really started to dig deeper into the Megami Tensei franchise as a whole, both mainline and its various spin-offs. And very recently, I got around to playing the Devil Summoner Soul Hackers port/remake for the 3DS. While it was very far from my favorite game of the branching SMT franchise, I did very much enjoy it for what it was. For the most part. So then I figured, what the heck, I'll play through its 25-year-later sequel next. I mean, my eventual goal was to end up playing them all, so I figured what better time to play its sequel than right after it. Before, however, I really get into it, I do want to reiterate that I am not some lifelong Soul Hackers fan. I really do not have the perspective of someone who played and loved the original even 5 years ago, let alone 10 to 25 years ago, and finally getting their long-awaited sequel. But trying my best to look at it from their point of view, I can understand maybe why, as a sequel, they might be a little disappointed in it. Like I said before, I wasn't exactly in love with the original, mainly due to the overall demon loyalty mechanic and everything that resulted in the overall gameplay loop, but I can totally understand that people who are looking forward to the sequel, maybe expanding upon some of these systems, being irked that this game sort of really forgoes that gameplay identity that the original had and tried to make it its own thing. But basically, I was just going into it with pretty much no knowledge aside from the fact that a lot of people really don't like this game. Mega 10 fans, both new and old. Personally, however, I actually ended up thinking this game was pretty great. So much so that it ended up being one of those games that I kinda had trouble putting down. The whole time I was playing, I kept thinking, this was the game people called Persona but bad? They have to be mistaken. Yeah, but no, when I looked it up to see a lot of the reception with my newfound perspective, it was still mainly negative, or at absolute best, kind of mid. It just ended up becoming one of those things, like, all of these people's opinions can't be invalid. Am I the stupid one? But after a lot of introspection and really analyzing the game systems as a whole, I still can't bring myself to say that this game isn't good. I'm not using this video to invalidate anybody's opinions. I'm not coming on here and saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I mainly just want to use this video to share my own perspective on what I find to be good about this game. And maybe there will be people who agree with me. Starting off with something I really like, I think this game has a really neat battle system. For those unaware, Soul Hackers 2 utilizes what's called the Sabbath mechanic. The Sabbath is a big multi-target attack triggered after all of your party members take their turn, and the amount of damage it does is based on how many stacks you accumulate over the course of your turn, and the way that you earn these stacks is by striking enemies' weaknesses in battle. There are other ways to earn extra stacks, more on that later, but basically if an enemy is weak to, I don't know, let's say fire and lightning, for every time you connect an either fire or lightning attack, you add a stack, and the big damage at the end of the turn goes up. While I for sure prefer the press turn system in mainline, for the sheer amount of depth that it adds to the combat, as well as how you have to play around the enemy taking advantage of it as well, but I really do like how the Sabbath system more so rewards adaptability and type coverage over raw power. While preparing to set out in a dungeon, it's just fun to have to account for all the different typings and making sure I have all my bases covered, in order to proceed through the battles smoothly and efficiently. Like I said, it is no replacement for the press turn system, but it's not really trying to be, and that's okay. I think it does a fantastic job of taking advantage of the series' mainstay gimmick of heavily rewarding when you exploit weaknesses, while at the same time being unique and its own thing. One of the things I had to learn while playing the original Soul Hackers was to stop wishing it to play exactly like the other games in the series, and just enjoy it for what it was. And I think it's fair to apply the same logic here. Another thing I also really like is the character progression and customization. This game forgoes the system of having your human protagonist summoning demons to fight alongside him in combat, in favor of having just your standard 4 human, well 3.5-ish human party members. I see a lot of criticism about this change, about how it's negative and makes it too much like Persona, but I don't necessarily agree, at least in the sense that that's a negative thing. I can see the comparisons because yeah, it works very similar to the wildcard system in modern Persona games, because fundamentally it works in the sense that your human characters have their own stats and progression systems, but you can equip your demons to all 4 of those party members, not just your protagonist like in modern Persona. And I know Persona is arguably the most popular Mega 10 series nowadays, but I seriously cannot stand the wildcard system. It just feels so limiting to only be able to customize your one guy and be forced to pick 3 party members with their fixed skills and affinities. Soul Hackers 2 party members basically work like this system in modern Persona, as in you give demons to party members, which gives them the demon's resistances, stats, and skills, but you aren't just limited to only customizing your protagonists. So no, I think that the argument that this change just makes it worse Persona is completely invalid. If, however, someone were to not like that this system basically just takes Persona's mechanics and sort of just gives it a little bit more depth, then that's a fair thing to say, and I'm really not arguing that. It's also pretty far from mainline levels of depth, so I can understand that if that also turns people off. I guess I would just say I think it falls in the middle. But however, I think it uses its position in the middle to its advantage. I love mainline, but sometimes it feels pretty bad just trying to fill out the compendium or trying to curate your team for a boss fight just due to how little money you have throughout the game. I'm definitely not arguing against that or saying that it's bad, because it completely adds to the challenge and resource management aspects of mainline that I love so much. But sometimes I just want to be able to fuse all the demons and fill out my little notebook without having to grind hours for money. It really feels like you get the best of both worlds. And while frankly, I definitely still prefer mainline over this by a lot, I think I would take Soul Hackers 2 over any and all of the Persona games. Take, for instance, just a random boss fight. You go in, if you don't win, you use your ample money to set up demons on your party members that cover what the boss will throw at you, while also having skills to strike weaknesses yourself. In a mainline game, you might not have the money to optimize your team unless you want to get your money up. While in a Persona game, it feels like it just doesn't matter for anyone that isn't a self-insert protagonist. I know I've talked about this for a while now, but I cannot stress enough how well I think that this game's customization system stands out in comparison. I guess to put it shortly, it feels like you get a lot of the same dopamine hits as you do playing mainline, with the same amount of time and energy investment that you might spend in a Persona game. It feels like it's a good SMT game for people who aren't looking or in the mood to invest the same amount of energy that you would playing mainline. And that's fine, because mainline definitely isn't going anywhere, and I'm not opposed to a more casual experience either. You know, as long as the systems remain engaging, and I do find that they do here. The way you upgrade your characters is also pretty fun here as well. You collect different demon parts in the dungeons to apply skills and attributes to them, no matter what demons they have equipped. For instance, you can unlock unique skills or ways to add more stacks to your Sabbath in a way that complements the customization that each one of them has. Moving on, I also know that the dungeon crawling itself isn't very popular here. I personally kind of liked it, maybe not as much as the dungeons in the original Soul Hackers, but I kind of find these dungeons to feel exactly like something like Tartarus in Persona 3, or the generated floors in Persona 4. Which I've always loved and preferred immensely over a lot of puzzle dungeons in a lot of other games. I've always been a fan of a lot of older school type dungeons that sort of get you to and from the combat faster, rather than having a lot of games' challenge and time investment come from something completely outside of and separated from the combat. Looking at you two. And I know that this last part isn't exactly commentary on the structural quality of the game itself, but for lack of a better term, I freaking love Ringo. I really didn't know what to expect from her going in. I sort of just thought she would play out like any other Mega 10 protagonists. Like, I knew at least unlike them she at least had lines, but I thought she would be very bare bones in terms of an arc or personality, because frankly, that's what most every game in the series has set my expectations as. But no, she is the complete opposite. She is downright fantastic. There is so much life and personality in literally everything that she says and does. She is such a fun character in every sense of the word, and I think her voice actress does a phenomenal job of expressing her. She was such a joy to watch and listen to every time she was on screen. Seriously, I guess it must sound like I'm fangirling here, but I just love her that much. And I think she is the biggest argument against silent protagonists in the entire world. And I also know that there's probably some recency bias at play here, but I would not be surprised in the slightest if after the dust settles, she ends up being one of my favorite RPG protagonists of all time. But while I really do like this game, there are some things that I'm not the hugest fan of myself. The big one being the side quests. They kind of suck. That's not to say that they're all bad. There are some like the Go Maid and Fusion quests and the challenge battles that I always had fun with whenever they came up. But I feel like there are just so many of them that boil down to, okay, go to this dungeon and beat this many of this demon, or collect this many of this item. It sort of reminds me of like Etrian Odyssey in this sense, where most of the side quests aren't genuinely not worth doing just based off of how tedious they are for how little the reward makes them worth doing. But unlike Etrian, Soul Hackers 2 has some that are really worth doing, but you really don't always know until afterwards, so it sort of just feels like you gotta do them all anyway. And yeah, a lot of the times the reward is pretty stupid, like a healing item I could just go buy at the store. But sometimes the rewards are very crucial, like new items at shops, new hangout events, or big discounts on the compendium. So it just feels like you're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. A lot of the dungeon problems aren't even that noticeable until you try to do quests that have you in there, just walking around, collecting items and running in circles. When I was just going through them, battling enemies and trying to make it to the end, they were fine. But when you have to run around, I can see why people get turned off by them so much. But while it's not really my favorite game in the world, aside from this and just some other minor nitpicks, I think it is a really good title in the Megaten series of games, and I fully believe it deserves to stand up there, even if there are a lot of people that will say otherwise. I mean, Atlus themselves showed commitment to making it a great experience. They even pushed out a free update a little while after the launch, adding... What? A sprint button? The update that came out almost 3 months after the game's release added the sprint button? You mean for almost a quarter of a year after this game came out, everyone was just walking around like this? And those side quests that I was already complaining about where I could sprint and you just go through the entire dungeon, you're just walking around this slow? The sprint button is at a decent speed, but I just never would have thought that there would be something like this that you would have to add post-launch. And not even just the sprint button, but all kinds of little things. Like, another big example being, nowadays you're able to teleport directly to shops, but once again, I'm finding out that the first 3 months after this game's lifespan, aka a very important time frame for the public's reception of a game, if you wanted to leave the dungeon to head to a shop, you had to teleport to the district and walk there. Not sprint there, walk there very slowly to the store every single time. Whew. Well, I guess that sort of recontextualizes a lot of haters of this game for me. Frankly, I might not have been a fan of this if I played it when it came out, and honestly, if someone bought this on launch and all of the lack of the literal bare minimum quality of life mechanics were completely absent, I don't think I could blame someone for not liking it either. I can't even comprehend the stupidity of the lack of a lot of these things on launch, so I am doing a complete 180 in the sense that, well, now it makes sense that this game was not loved on release. I literally never knew that this update was a thing until I started working on this video. But honestly, as someone who played it for the first time in 2024, after a bunch of updates came out for it, I think it's still a pretty good game. And while I completely understand now if you played it and didn't like it when it came out, I do think it's worth another shot. And to anyone who hasn't played it at all yet, I think there's a ton of fun to be had here. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like or even subscribe. I want to keep making all sorts of fun RPG videos, and I'd love for you all to see them. If you look in the description, you can also find my Twitter or even join my Discord server, where we have a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks for watching.